The Killing of a Sacred Deer is easily one of the most uniquely disturbing films that I've seen all year and will undoubtedly make it into my top 5 films of the year. It's a film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and it's packed to the brim with moral themes, subtle character details and character arcs, symbolism and metaphors. It's packed with so many discussion pieces that it's nearly essential to give the film multiple viewings in order to attempt to unpack it all. In this video, I'm going to attempt to dissect the characters and symbolic themes of the film, most especially its central characters with Colin Farrell as Stephen the Heart Surgeon and Bob Kagan as the young boy Martin. Now before I move on, this video is going to obviously contain some major spoilers, so if you would rather hear an in-depth opinion without the film being spoiled, please watch my spoiler-free review. You can find the link at the end screen of this video and also in the description box below. So right off the bat, the film builds its suspense by playing dramatic, orchestrated music over a sustained black screen. This film is able to keep you in a constant state of suspense throughout the entire film, and it's mainly due to its eerie, lingering score that never seems to let you breathe. The black screen cuts to a close-up of an exposed, beating human heart of a heart surgery patient as it slowly zooms further out. This is an extraordinary establishing shot because you can instantly get a sense of the kind of power and control that heart surgeons have over your well-being. It also just establishes a daunting, uneasy atmosphere. It then cuts to Colin Farrell's character, Stephen, take off his bloody latex gloves and throw them in the trash in slow motion. Before I talk about the symbolic meaning of this scene, I have to go ahead and unpack Colin Farrell's character, Stephen. There's going to be a lot to unpack here, so buckle up and be patient with me. Stephen is just an integral moral mess with pathetic immoral baggage. The film gives you subtle hints of the kind of dishonest person he is early on. The very first lines of the film is Stephen telling his anesthesiologist about how he prefers a metal strap to his watch rather than the leather strap for his own particular reasons. Soon after, he gives a metal watch as a gift to Martin. He is secretly meeting with Martin and has been ever since he killed Martin's father by performing surgery under the influence of alcohol. Stephen hasn't openly told anybody, including Martin, that the patient's death was his fault. So in Stephen's mind, devoting time to Martin when he can is his own way of taking accountability without really having to take accountability. Anyway, going back to the dialogue regarding the watch, Martin later reveals to Stephen that he changed the metal strap for a leather one, and Stephen doesn't reject or criticize this at all as he did before with his anesthesiologist. He also lies to his anesthesiologist about his relation to Martin. You can already tell that Stephen is lying about this before the film reveals his true relation to Martin, because the story that he tells his anesthesiologist is nearly identical to a story that his wife tells him earlier. These subtle nods to his dishonesty occurs within the first 15 minutes of the film and carries on to be a much more noticeable and salient character trait of his as the film progresses. I promise I'll get back to this introduction scene soon, but let me just unpack a little more about Stephen. It'll make my interpretation much more substantive and sensible, I promise. Stephen's pathetic dishonesty continues to snowball and gets worse as his dark past begins to come to light. Earlier in the film, Stephen lied to his wife, played by Nicole Kidman, by stating that Martin's father died in a car crash. Eventually, his wife discovers the truth about the death of Martin's father and asks Stephen if it was his fault. Stephen of course denies that he was responsible for the death of Martin's father and even goes far enough to blame his anesthesiologist. He quotes,
"A surgeon never kills a patient. An anesthesiologist can kill a patient, but a surgeon never can."
This is a cowardice, dishonest deflection of somebody who will not face reality and take accountability for his actions. Throughout the film, there are multiple compliments about his hands. They've been called perfect, beautiful, white, and clean. You see him washing his hands a few times, and you also see Martin's mother become sexually obsessed with his hands, which certainly made for an awkward but good scene. But he also reveals a darkly intense secret to his son that also involves his hands. That disturbing scene where he tells his son that when he was his age, he became paranoid and insecure about the tiny amount of sperm he was only able to produce because he had heard all kinds of crazy stories at school. So he reveals that one night when his father got nice and drunk, he reached into his father's pants and pleasured him until he ejaculated, which ended up scaring the shit out of him. Whew. But to finally sum all this up in relation to this introductory scene here, Stephen's beautiful, clean, white hands are actually a juxtaposition of who he actually is inside. Stephen is a man that has an intense amount of repressed baggage that he has yet to properly come to terms with. Instead, he continues to feed and maintain his idolized image because he's too cowardly to deal with the kind of consequences that his repressions could bring him. So in the scene where he removes his dirty, bloody gloves and throws them in the garbage, this is a symbolic representation of Stephen as a character. The dirty and bloody latex gloves represent his true repressive identity. By removing them and throwing them in the trash, he is burying his dark repressive self into a place where he hopes nobody will ever discover, and he continues to live his life through his idolized lens, which he knows is fake. His hands are dirty and bloody, but he wants people to continue to believe that they are clean and beautiful. He's a man that refuses to take accountability for his inexcusable actions because it would compromise his status and image. Martin is well aware of this. Martin knows that Stephen is responsible for his father's death, and he also knows what kind of person Stephen is, which is why he set up the entire scenario the way that he did. Martin is God, or at least a godlike figure, both literally and figuratively. Literally, because he obviously possesses supernatural abilities, and he is figuratively God for a few reasons. The main one being that he is the moral arbiter and justice seeker of the film. He is the one who willingly set up his scenario in which he used his powers to carry forward his own moral vision of justice. This is similar to many depictions of God in religions both ancient and contemporary. God or gods are usually depicted as beings with unstoppable supernatural powers who set out and create their own justice system based on their own moral code. Also, the fact that Nicole Kidman kisses his feet is very symbolic and allegorical to the Bible. The scene that seems a bit straightforward but still worth analyzing is the scene where Martin explains his moral viewpoint when he is tied up in Stephen's basement. He severely bites down on Stephen's arm, leaving a painful wound. He sarcastically offers to rub his wound but says that it will probably make it feel worse. So the only way to make him feel better is to bite his own flesh off, and that's exactly what he does, which, by the way, made for an engagingly intense scene. When Martin sarcastically offers to, quote, rub his wound to make it feel better, this was him metaphorically gesturing towards the actions of Stephen. Stephen, instead of taking accountability for the death of Martin's father, would rather just hang out with Martin every now and then and pretend to be this half-assed father figure. Rubbing a deep wound that you've inflicted on somebody doesn't really do anything for the victim. It only makes the perpetrator attempt to feel better about his actions. Which is why I stated earlier that Stephen hanging out with Martin was his own way of taking accountability without actually having to take accountability. So Martin set up this morally conflicting scenario for Stephen to confront that would virtually force him to honestly face his buried repressions and take full accountability for his pathetic and immoral actions. By the very end of the movie, he is forced to face the reality of the current situation that he is facing and decides to go through with what Martin said and to kill off a member of his family. Unfortunately, the youngest child, Bob, gets shot by Stephen as he randomly picks someone to kill by tying his entire family up and randomly spinning around with his face covered up as he takes a shot at the end of each spin. Hence the name, the killing of a sacred deer. It comes from an ancient Greek myth where a character in the story was responsible for accidentally killing a sacred deer, and a blood price was required in order to reconcile the situation. I also think that the moral philosophy that forgiveness can only be given if a sacred blood sacrifice is made is an allegory to the biblical belief revolving around the story of Jesus Christ. Now, before I conclude this video, I want to talk about the daughter of the family named Kim. There is lots of salient things to discuss and point out in regarding her character. As the film progresses, Kim obviously falls for Martin. The scene where she sings a song of her choice to Martin can be read as both a character moment and a foreshadowing moment. It's a character moment because it's an Ellie Goulding song that caters to the rebellious teenager mentality which fits her so well. And it's a foreshadowing moment because the lyrics regarding fire and burning things down can suggest a vengeful attitude that is reflective of the events that Martin unfolded on top of Stephen's family. And there is also a scene that occurs between her and her mother that gives you a subtle hint that she knew the specifics and was aware of the impending doom that the family would experience before anybody else knew about it. When Kim comes home late one night after hanging out with Martin, she has an anxious demeanor as she asks her mother how her brother is doing. After her mother replies that he's doing fine, Kim nervously asks her if she's feeling okay. She gives Kim a curious face but answers that yes, she's feeling fine. Kim then anxiously just walks into the house and then the scene ends. This is a subtle indicator that Martin told Kim about everything that was soon to unfold, but she kept to herself. With Kim's character, she at first was quite unfazed by the gravity of the situation. She was unfazed because she became arrogantly confident that Martin would save her and they would run off together. She became cold-hearted to her family because she truly felt that she would escape the situation unscathed. But as the clock continued to kick and her minutes started closing in on her, she realizes that Martin is not going to do anything for her because it would completely taint the moral justice and vengeance he is seeking out against her father. Once she realizes this reality, she begins to panic and attempts to escape. Once her parents find her, she begins to plead and beg her father to not kill her by kissing some extreme ass. The way this scene is structured can be confusing at first, but by the end of it, I found it to be unique, intense, and creative. The scene begins at the end of the narrative with her begging after her parents find her, while it occasionally cross-cuts to the chronological sequence of the narrative from the beginning until the cross-cutting intersects and merges into real time. It was a very interesting scene, and I truly appreciated the craft behind it. Well, alright, there's my quick analysis of this gorgeous yet disturbing film. I absolutely adore films like this because it just sparks so much discussion. So if anybody would like to give their 2 cents and give their own interpretation or add anything to my interpretation, please go ahead and do that and comment below. And if you really like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the Misfit Pawn channel to be updated on more film-related content.